All right. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here this evening. We'll wait just a little bit here and let people get signed in.
How long should I go? Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, go ahead. I'll do a little introduction and then I'll hand it off to you.
No, I was like, I think I have 20 or 25 minutes and then Q&A. Does that sound about right?
Yeah,
okay.
That sounds perfect.
Cool. I should have checked that before we went live, but feel free to cut me off if I talk too much.
No problem. So we're just gonna wait a few more seconds and let folks get signed in, and then we'll get started. All right, so I think we'll go ahead. So good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here with us. Welcome to Small Business Storytime. LPL is celebrating Booktoberfest all month long. There's tons of fun events in the lineup for that. Later this week, there will be Hot Ghoul Bingo with Deja. Haunted Stacks is coming up in a couple of weeks. There's going to be trivia, all kinds of fun stuff. So in keeping with that Booktober theme, tonight's Small Business Storytime is going to delve into the business of independent bookselling with Danny Caine. Danny has been at the helm of the Raven Bookstore in downtown Lawrence since 2017. In 2019, the Midwest Independent Booksellers Association named him Midwest Bookseller of the Year. Danny is also a poet with 2 recent poetry collections out, and he's also the author of How to Resist Amazon and Why. If you have questions during Danny's presentation, feel free to pop those into the chat or the Q&A. We are recording this session, so it will be available for you to view later on the library's YouTube channel. I'm excited to introduce Danny Caine, and I'm gonna turn it over to you, Danny.
Thanks so much, Melissa. I'm really happy to be here. Just right off the bat, one of the things that has been the most fun about owning the Raven and being a small business owner in Lawrence has been the community partnerships that we're able to form and the friendships and alliances we're able to make. And I think there's no greater friendship that the Raven has than our friendship with the Lawrence Public Library. So we're happy to do this and so many other things with them. Yesterday night, we were selling books at their wonderful Susan Orlean event at Liberty Hall. We really, really love the library. And that's, I guess, my first takeaway about the book selling business is that bookstores and libraries should be friends. They're on the same team. All right, I have a presentation with lots of photos, including lots of talk of our new store. So I'm gonna go ahead and share that with you all. I'm going to take you a little bit through the history of the Raven. We'll cover some notable recent events, including that book, How to Resist Amazon and Why, and then we'll talk about our move to our new space at 809 Mass here in Lawrence. So here it is. This is the old facade of our original location at 6 East 7th Street on the north end of downtown Lawrence, a half block away from Mass Street. This is a picture from back in the days. I think this was somewhere in the 90s because we expanded into both storefronts. When the Raven opened in 1987, September 1st, 1987, it was just in this half of the store, 8 East 7th Street. They did not even have a bathroom in the store. It was so small. Eventually, they expanded into both sides, about 1,200 square feet, and that's where it was until just a couple months ago. But we'll get to that later. The Raven was founded in September 1st, 1987 by 2 women, 2 college friends, Pat Katie and Mary Lou Wright. They were friends from college who later met up back here in Lawrence. I know Pat worked at the KU Info booth where people would call and drop in with questions about KU in kind of a pre-internet age. But they both decided to team up around one of their passions, which is mystery books and crime fiction, and start a specialty bookstore just about selling basically mystery books only. Some local titles, almost all mystery books. They were not taken particularly seriously by people like banks and lenders. They were, in fact, unable to secure a formal loan for opening their bookstore. All of the banks they talked to saw these two women, and they considered this bookstore a hobby instead of a relevant or feasible business interest. When, jokes on them, 35 years later, the Raven is chugging along just fine. But despite that, they scrapped together. They did kind of an early analog version of crowdfunding and did some low interest loans from friends. One of them took out a second mortgage on their house and they pieced it together. The independent bookstore scene in Lawrence in 1987 was a lot different than it is now. And there were many more of them. At the time, there were around 6 or 7 independent bookstores downtown, and they were all specialized. There was a kids bookstore, a travel bookstore, a kind of newsstand and popular books, and then of course the Raven with its mystery section. Another thing that they really did well, we'll get to that in a second. Another thing they really did well was Pat and Mary Lou were very good at sharing the importance of small businesses. They were advocates for the importance of small business. They were advocates for keeping downtown driven by small businesses. It's a discussion we're having today. It was a discussion they were having in the 80s. And that came to a head in 2007 when there began to be talks of converting the building at the southeast corner of 7th Street in New Hampshire into a Borders Books superstore. It was like many decisions like this in Lawrence, it was drawn out and contentious, and there was much debate, including op-eds and newspaper interviews given by the owners of the Raven, opposing this giant corporate megastore coming to downtown within spitting distance of the beloved Raven bookstore. I mean, this is literally across the street. As you can see, it eventually did open. The Borders was there from 2000, or no, when did it open? 1997. I'm sorry, I misspoke. It opened in 97 and closed in 2011 when the Borders chain shut down entirely. So this is 97. In the mid 90s were kind of the peak of independent book selling in America. I mean, it was a peak. They were very powerful. It was one of the only places to buy books. It was where people went. People were buying books from independents. The chains were not very popular or mighty yet. There were Barnes and Nobles, there were Borders, but they were smaller concerns. And the big chains really rose to dominance right around the tail end of the 90s when the Borders in Lawrence opened. And then of course, after Borders shut down and Barnes and Noble is weakened, Amazon was left. So that's a little bit of the trajectory of the book business. But back to Pat and Mary Lou and the Raven, they were very, very good. Their strategy with the megastore across the street was just to advocate and be not quiet about the importance of small businesses, the dangers of letting corporations take over downtown. And they would say this wherever and to whomever would listen. And that really, really inspired me looking back at the history of the Raven. As a small business owner, in many ways, you're an advocate for yourself, for your industry, and for small businesses in general. Because, it's hard. It's an uphill climb to start a feasible and successful small business or shepherd an existing small business into an uncertain future dominated by big corporations. And so that activist spark is really necessary. And Pat and Mary Lou understood that. So the Raven made it. Of course, in 2007, it sold to a person named Heidi Rock. I adore Heidi. Heidi ended up hiring me to the Raven as a part-time bookseller in 2015. Although they took a hit with the Borders, they never really reached the sales levels that they had in 1996 and 1997 after that Borders opened. A popular piece of Raven legend is that the Saturday Borders opened was the Raven's biggest day of all time. That is true. Lawrence really came out in support of the beloved little Raven, but you can't have a store like that across the street without feeling an impact on your business. And so this is just a really quick little summary of the impact of a place like Borders on the Raven. The Borders has a much bigger inventory. For a long time, the big chains had better terms from publishers, meaning the Borders, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, Walden Books. These places had access to better pricing from publishers than the small independent bookstores. The American Booksellers Association successfully undertook legal action to take care of that problem. So that allegedly is no longer the case, but it was the case when Borders opened here. They have an impossibly large inventory, exponentially bigger than the Ravens inventory, and a lot of those books are on sale because they're just operating at a different margin. Literally because they're getting the books for cheaper, and their volume, they have kind of the corporate structure. It's really impossible for a small bookstore to do things this way. But it's also, a lot of that money is going back to Borders corporate headquarters, which is in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is a long way from Lawrence, Kansas. So with a small independent business, as Pat would tell you, as I would tell you, a small locally owned independent business keeps a lot of that money in the community, much more than a corporate chain. So I came on at the Raven in 2015 as a part-time bookseller and fell in love with the business. And I was here to get an MFA in poetry from the University of Kansas. After I graduated, I just decided to buy the bookstore. Heidi was ready to move on. I was looking for a job. She worked out, we worked out a really friendly deal that would kind of let a recent grad student and poet kind of take care of this financially. A little bit unconventional. We can talk about that later if people have questions, but it happened. And then on August 1st, 2017, I bought the store. So just over 4 years ago. And then of course, stepping into the independent book business in August of 2017 means stepping into the Amazon discussion. And like I said, the chains are kind of weakened now. And part of what's weakening those chains is also the biggest challenge facing small bookstores is Amazon. And to work in an independent bookstore, you need to be able to talk through these issues because it comes up every day. All of the problems with Borders are worse with Amazon. They have a bigger inventory and their books are even cheaper. And so basically with the bookstore, it's a funny thing. We're asking customers to spend more money for slower service, essentially. We can't ship for free. We can't ship the next day. We have to charge cover price for the books. Otherwise, we'd go out of business. So that's a really complicated and kind of nonetheless compelling story to tell our customers. And any bookstore, and I think any retail small business at this point has to learn how to tell that story to its customers and have that discussion with them. So there's a laundry list of things that Amazon, I take issue with how they do things. Again, we can talk about that in the questions if you want, but it's the quick takeaway is that everything that was wrong with the chains is worse with Amazon. And it's also, they're very much anti-worker, which I take a lot of issue with. They're dangerous jobs. And they're anti-union. I think it's a dangerous place to work in many ways. All right. So this storytelling was always part of the Ravens business model. Like I said, Pat and Mary Lou were always willing to talk to the newspaper, write an op-ed about the importance of small businesses. The tool available to me in 2017 as a bookstore owner, I mean, I still talk to newspapers. I was just talking to KCUR for a radio piece the other day. But one tool we had that Pat and Mary Lou didn't is social media. And so after overhearing in April 2019, after overhearing Chris, our inventory manager, having the Amazon discussion with a customer, I just decided to tweet some quick thoughts and kind of make a quick attempt at telling this story and explaining why we're selling books for more than Amazon and why bookstores are important to communities. And as you can see from these numbers, this thing really blew up in ways I never thought a bookstore tweet could. So all of a sudden, we had a lot of people paying attention to us and what we were talking about. And I saw this as an opportunity. This discussion we're having right now in this room about Amazon is a discussion that I was seeing happening a lot among booksellers. It was kind of a closed circle. Every time you go to a bookseller convention, you hear people talking about Amazon and how to deal with it and the importance of booksellers. I wasn't hearing it that much in between booksellers and customers. This Twitter thread was a start. And I had a friend who And so I mean, it really did go crazy. I mean, this is a columnist, Mary Smith, is a Pulitzer-winning columnist for the Chicago Tribune, who took my Twitter thread as an opportunity to write a column about this for the Chicago Tribune. And this is truly wild. And I never thought this would happen. I was just trying to sort through my feelings about Chris having this discussion with this customer. But again, I saw it as an opportunity to address an audience and to bring this conversation from booksellers to customers in an important way. So step one of that was to write an open letter to Jeff Bezos as kind of a thesis statement. I'm a former English teacher. It was important to me, if I was going to take on this argument, to have a thesis or a manifesto, or to make sure I knew exactly what I was arguing, and how I wanted to do it in a way that would uplift small businesses. I always view what I do and how I advocate as pro small business and not necessarily anti Amazon. I think in 2021, it's impossible to be pro small business and not anti Amazon, but I focus on the pro small business as a way to keep the argument positive and uplifting. When I posted this, a friend of mine who owns a bookstore in Cleveland sent me a text, was like, you should turn this letter into a broadside or a zine, because I think I could sell this at the front counter. I think customers would be interested in this. We have a lot of people asking about Amazon and thinking about unplugging. And again, that really resonated with me, because I was already thinking about how to bring the dialogue to customers, and having a little zine or pamphlet on the front counter would be a great way to do that. So I self-published a zine called How to Resist Amazon and Why. I know one of the thrills of this whole thing for me was seeing the Lawrence Public Library pick up this zine and add it to their collection. And to walk into the library and see it with a little sticker on the side in the zine racks in the library was super cool. So I initially self-published these. You see my long arm stapler right there. I was making zines, and demand from Raven customers and demand from other bookstores across the country very quickly became overwhelming. And I was spending all of my evenings making zines, and my wife was very tired of folding and stapling and collating. And so I needed help in this issue, in creating and keeping up with the demand. So enter Microcosm Publishing out of Portland, who's a really cool group of folks. Bookstores tend to have a lot more to say about Amazon than publishers do, because publishers, their hands are tied. Amazon accounts for half of all book sales, 75% of all online book sales. A publisher can't really bite the hand that feeds them by taking a really strong anti-Amazon response. That's how the conventional thinking goes. Microcosm, I already knew this long before any of the zine stuff happened, decided to cancel all their contracts with Amazon, and they don't deal directly with Amazon at all. They do their own distribution as a way to get around their ethical complaints with Amazon. So they've divested, and I knew this. And when they approached me to make a version of this zine, I was thrilled, because I think they're a perfect fit. So they published the orange version and took over production for me, and it kind of went crazy. This resonated around the country and in many ways around the world. And like our little humble Raven bookstore zine I was getting pictures of it from everywhere: Canada, Japan, Germany, Australia. It's truly been humbling and inspiring to see how much this has taken off. So Microcosm was obviously thrilled that they had a hit, and so they asked me to, well, this is a little bit about the pandemic. We'll get to that in a second. So Microcosm asked me to expand it into a book. I did. And that book came out this spring, and it's a much more expanded and clear argument than what's in the zine. I was able to really look at a lot of stuff I didn't get to in the zine, like legislative action to combat Amazon, which I think is really kind of the true solution. Again, we can talk about that a little bit more in the questions if you want. So that's the How to Resist Amazon and Why. All of this really kind of rocketed the Raven to national attention. And made a lot of people pay attention to us. And we were getting orders from all 50 states. We were profiled in the New Yorker. You can see that here. Casey Sepp, who's a wonderful writer, wrote an article about the Raven and our advocacy for the New Yorker. This is a screenshot of me being interviewed for Australian TV. It's been wild. This little bookstore in Kansas really found a huge, huge audience. And so again, I wanted to make sure we were doing things right, and we were ethically sound in how we were doing things, and that extended to how we approached the pandemic. We were basically as strict as we could possibly be about about keeping our employees safe during the pandemic. That was my number one goal. Was one, to keep the employees, and two, to keep the employees safe. I'm proud to say we have had zero turnover since March of 2020. So all of our employees have stayed on board all the way throughout the pandemic at their full hours. No one has left because of furloughs or anything else. We've in fact added quite a few people, but nobody has left. And we've been really, I think, uh, lucky slash careful with COVID. And knock on wood, we've been all right so far because, again, my main goal was to protect my workers. In part because you do enough research about Amazon and you see that keeping their workers safe is not a priority there. And so it made me want to keep my workers as safe as I possibly could. So we shut down in-person browsing in the third week of March 2020, and we didn't bring it back until June 2021. So we were closed for more than a year. And if you'll remember, June 2021, the positivity rate was less than 1%. It looked really, really good in June, and then this stupid Delta thing happened. But again, we still have a strict mask mandate in store. All of our employees are vaccinated. I didn't have to mandate it; they just did it, and now we're all getting booster shots. I think another way people have another thing about the Raven people have really appreciated is keeping our workers safe, and they thank us. Oh, and we were this quote in the New York Times: "We're going to operate like a pizza takeout place." That was me. We ended up keeping that for about 1 week and then we closed totally. But during that 1 week, we were in the New York Times talking about COVID safety. Um, our sales were actually up in 2020. We retained all of our employees. Now this is with our new store, you can say added 5 positions. And then in terms of Amazon, there's growing antitrust momentum in Congress. And I think more and more people are talking about Amazon and the problems of letting a company like this get this big. So I'm feeling pretty hopeful, and I'm feeling really appreciative of all of this support. I don't know exactly where this support comes from. I think people do appreciate a small business that aligns with their ethics, and a lot of the people who have come to us and helped us get that sales growth are doing it either because of our Amazon advocacy or because we are making a strong point to keep our workers and customers safe. And then I also think just Lawrence, Kansas is a community that understands the importance of small businesses. And going back to the 80s and even before that, downtown Lawrence is a truly special place because of all the great small business that's down there. And like keeping small retail businesses open is a huge challenge for a lot of urban places. And like I'm from Cleveland and I go back to Cleveland all the time to see my family. And in all of downtown Cleveland, there's very little retail at all. And then on one block of downtown Lawrence, you have Sunflower, Love Garden, Wonder Fair, Game Nut, Third Planet, The Raven, jewelry store, organic furniture store. That's incredible. And it's because the community of Lawrence really understands and appreciates the value of small businesses. And The Raven has seen that through this great growth. And so one way that growth has manifested is we have a brand new location. So the first time in 34 years, we have moved and expanded. And a lot of this stuff, a lot of this growth that came in the last couple of years has kind of forced us into expanding. And so this is 809 Massachusetts Street on the day we signed the letter of intent to move in. It was Blade and Timber axe throwing, and they unfortunately had an accidental fire and had to move out. They decided not to reopen and the space became available. We were looking at a couple spaces, and believe it or not, we really felt the magic in this one. And I took all of the Raven booksellers to every place we were looking at, and there was near unanimous consent that this was going to be our future home, despite the shambles it was in. And like this big picture on the right of your screen, this is looking up. There's no roof on the first floor. You're looking straight up through the second floor all the way to the ceiling. So there was just no ceiling at all. It was really, really a mess, but I think people could see the magic. You could see, I mean, even here, You can see the cool old wood flooring. You've got some of the tin ceiling here. And we had talked to the landlords. We knew what their plans were, and we decided to go with this. So why we needed a new space. These are a couple of the reasons. There were a lot of reasons we decided to move. The first big one was all of this online business from our new national audience. We had no room to process these orders. We were processing online orders at the front register, which was fine while we were closed because that's all we were doing. But when you have people browsing, when we were closed, it was a mess in the store. It was basically a warehouse. It wasn't a comfortable or good place to browse. We needed to separate this order processing from the sales floor. So we needed a new back room with new computers in it to kind of separate our online book selling business from the in-store business, both of which were important to us throughout 2020 and both of which will remain important to us. Though online sales have fallen, they haven't fallen anywhere near pre-pandemic levels. So we're still, even though we're off our peak, we're still exponentially more than we were in 2019. The building we were in did not have a great HVAC system. And we also had like 180 feet of south-facing windows, which basically turned it into a greenhouse. It was never the right temperature in the old Raven. In the summer, it was truly unbearable. In February, during the cold spell, when it was like -17, I went into work and the heat was on. I went into work to check on the cats and it was like 48 degrees inside the store, even though the heat was on. And it was regularly 85 or 86 in there during the summer. And again, keeping it safe and pleasant for all of the employees, feline and human, we needed it to be a more comfortable place to work. One of the things we love to talk about is how independent bookstores should be accessible spaces for anybody. They should be welcoming. They should be places of welcome and invitation. And in our old space, that didn't extend in a very physical sense to anybody who needed mobility help, whether it wheelchair or strollers. It was very difficult for people with mobility issues to get into the old store. That is not the case anymore. And then having talked to my other small business friends in Lawrence, I'm very good friends with the Love Garden people and the Wonder Fair people. They both, in their recent history, have moved from upstairs on Mass Street to street level on Mass Street. And they said their sales increase was just gigantic and that you can't beat the foot traffic on the main level of Mass Street. And we were interested in that. And I think early results are in that we have seen that increase in foot traffic and sales. So here are just some process picks to close us out. I feel like I'm giving a vacation slideshow because this has dominated my life so much for the last year plus. But just some process picks of turning that fire burned kind of dump into a new beautiful bookstore. This is right after they installed the tin ceiling. One of the things we loved about this space was the landlord's plans to preserve a lot of historical details. And so this is an original tin ceiling that they took and cleaned and salvaged and reinstalled. You can see the smoke damage on some of these panels and how uneven they were, but it was very important to us to preserve the historical integrity of the space. It's 1850 something. I think 1852 is the building. I mean, this is a building that was around for Quantrill's raid. So we wanted to honor that history. Here is the Raven management team on one of our staff meetings. This guy in the middle talking is Aaron Marable. He's the lead designer on the project. The staff was very involved in kind of monitoring and helping shape the space, which is a really fun collaborative process. And there's Aaron with our color scheme. He not only designed the bookcases and kind of generally conceived the interior space, he's an artist and he really had an artist's flair in kind of bringing the details to the final product. And this color, I mean, it's like these colors look cool together. These little pieces of wood look nice next to each other, but he had the vision in his head of how this would translate into a bookstore. And it's just kind of amazing. And it's work I couldn't do. So one of the things I've learned as a small business person is to hire people to do the things you can't, especially for me, that's artistic stuff. It's such a thrill to hire people with a stronger vision than me. And like, I can just give them a germ of an idea and they can turn it into something giant and beautiful. Has been really fun and rewarding. So you can see the kind of shape of the space coming in here. These planks here are kind of forming what would turn into the receiving and shipping room that I was talking about. back here behind the insulation is two bathrooms that are up to ADA code, and kind of the hallway back to the children's section. And here's Aaron installing one of his artistic flourishes and the arrival of the first set of bookcases. These became the children's section. I found these on Facebook Marketplace for less than $100 a piece. So a lot of the bookshelves were custom made and new, but some of this stuff is kind of scraps that I found and picked up or bought from other stores. Here are the custom bookshelves in their workshop in Kansas City. And here they are after they arrived in a giant truck and after a very strenuous day of unloading. We were supposed to be done with this in March, but it became August. And so just the fact that it got delayed that much meant that all of the heavy unloading happened during the heat of summer. We moved all the books and all the bookshelves on 95-degree days, which, you know, not ideal, but we did it. And then here, this is kind of when it's finally starting to take shape, and you can see the final layout, and the shelves are installed, the front counter is taking shape, the children's section is there, and then here's the final product. That's our new facade. We really love our gold lettering. Jeff Eaton, a local guy, did that. He painted our old window signs, and we loved it so much we hired him for this giant new job. That is gold leaf paint. That's not vinyl or anything. We did it the historic way, again, to kind of honor and showcase the historical vibe of the building. Here is the front room. Not only are the tin ceilings salvaged, but the floor, the wood flooring is original. We just fell in love with this wood floor with the kind of zigzag herringbone pattern. And then I think the gem of the whole thing is Aaron's kind of modernist children's section with these colorful cutouts, reading nooks beloved by children, adults, and cats alike. Bright colors, strong design. We're honoring the original Raven by putting our 80s sign on display right there. So it's been a lot of fun, and I think we're in a great place. Both, I mean, in terms of business and in terms of the physical space. If you haven't come to see it, I highly encourage you come visit. We're really enjoying selling books there, and I think a lot of people are enjoying coming in there to show their love of books through browsing and shopping. So that is all I've got. I'll stop sharing, and I'm really excited to take questions and kind of continue this conversation.
Great, thank you, Danny. If anybody has questions, feel free to pop those in the Q&A or the chat, and I can read those to Danny. I guess while we're waiting to see if any of you have questions, I always have some. So I would be interested in hearing more. You had mentioned that you had sort of a creative financing arrangement with your predecessor. And I think especially because women and minorities are often less likely to be able to get financing to start a business in a traditional way. So I think it would be interesting to hear a little bit more about how you came to that.
Right, and that's a huge concern of mine, actually. And I currently serve on the board of the American Booksellers Association, and one of my pet causes is making sure a younger generation of booksellers is able to open bookstores. There are a lot of ways to do it online. You can open online only bookstores for very cheap and do it pretty quick, but the transition to a physical space is a hugely expensive one, and it's very difficult, especially for generations like millennials and lower, who just, I mean, entire generation wise, have less inherited wealth, and that's amplified in communities of color and historically marginalized people. So it's a great question. I think in the Ravens case, it was already a profitable business, and it was an owner who was ready to go. And I think she was already willing to work with me because it was staying in good hands. Like, I was a known quantity. I worked at the store. I knew everybody there. I think she knew it was in good hands, so she was willing to be flexible. The way the deal was structured is that it's just seller financed. And so I basically took a loan from her, and I'm mailing loan checks directly to her once a month. The down payment was pretty low. It was money I'd been able to set aside. We didn't do much renovating early on. We did a little bit, but it was nowhere as expensive as doing the whole storefront that we just did. And then we didn't involve a bank, so I didn't need collateral or anything like that. It was just a good faith agreement between me and her that I would, be able to make these loan payments. And she knew the she knew the business and the numbers, and so she had a good idea of what a feasible monthly loan payment would be. I mean, it's really, I'll be paid off in less than a year. So it's a 5-year term. So I'm close to paying it off. And again, I was fresh out of grad school and I'm a poet. It's not like I was drowning in cash, but the kind of good faith agreement between seller and buyer was, and it was something I was working with my uncle, who is just on an informal consulting basis. And he was like, this is kind of crazy, but I think you might ask about seller financing. And I did. And she was just like, okay, that works. So I don't know if that's luck or how much people can take from that, but I think it is necessary to get creative, whether it's through crowdfunding or seller financing or anything like that. The traditional route of the big official, like putting on a suit and writing a business plan and getting a big loan from a bank, is really hard. And people need to think creatively. And I know, at least within the book industry, people are talking about how to make that easier. I would hope other industries are thinking about caring for the younger generations of entrepreneurs like that too.
I guess kind of along those lines, do you have any thoughts about um, what would be helpful in terms of supporting entrepreneurs, like coming from the city or the county?
Mhm.
Like where are the sort of pain points that you see where it would be helpful if there was more support?
Rent is the pain point. Like, this is downtown. The storefronts that have that great foot traffic are too expensive. And like, the Raven really had to negotiate to get it to a point where we could be able to swing it. And again, we're an established, affordable business, and an established, profitable business. And we've been so for many years. And even for us, the initial rent, the market rate on that space was like, oh, that's a little steep, I don't know if we can do that. So I just, any way possible to make good storefront spaces more accessible, whether that's kind of good faith landlords who are just happy to support small businesses. That's what we had in the original location for decades. We were way under market rate at the original Raven, just because the family that owns Liberty Hall was like, it's cool to have a bookstore here. We're happy to have our space filled. We like the Raven. We want them to succeed. And so that's I think a rare thing in the world of landlords. But I mean, there are people out there, and again, it's part of storytelling and being able to believe in what you do and explain it's good to the community, and maybe you'll find some sympathetic ears in the landlord that'll work with you. I think there are a lot of people who were surprised by how flexible their landlords were during COVID. I mean, just like any COVID story, there are good stories and tragic stories, and there are a lot of businesses that didn't make it or couldn't work it out with their landlords. But I do know of a lot of people that did manage to work something out to make it a little easier rent wise. And then just access to capital. I mean, it's any creative way for young entrepreneurs that don't have a ton of seed money already to be able to access that. Microloans, crowdfunding, community support. I think just there are people with good ideas that will be profitable, and they have great energy. They're community minded. They have concepts that'll work. But the one thing that's stopping them is access to capital. So, and those are complicated problems. And the landlords will say, well, property taxes are so high. If I charge lower rent, I'm going to lose money on my building. And everybody needs money. Nobody is flush with money. We've got budget cuts. There are all kinds of issues, but like they're tricky, but I think they're still worth fighting for, because I would hate to think that these talented entrepreneurs will never get a chance to at least try their concept. Melissa.
Sorry, we've got a
Yeah,
question in
okay.
the Q&A. It says, with your recent move and hiring more staff, is there any possibility that the Raven could extend hours to being open later in the evening?
Oh, that's an interesting question. uh, the Our hours are based a little bit on what everyone else does. Like the Raven is actually open a little bit later. I mean, there's a group of stores. I think Love Garden is open till 8 now. We're open till 8 every day except Sunday. And I think Love or Wonder Fair is still open till 8. And like, again, those are my buddies. And like, we are really united on stuff. So another thing I'm always thinking about is employee safety, like I talked about with COVID, but it's like, you don't want, I don't, uh, I'm a little leery about having younger employees working in a store when party hour starts to happen. Like, I think staying open late is in some ways a safety question too. I'm not opposed to it. And I think everybody is just kind of now getting back to pre-COVID hours for browsing. I I know it's tricky because normally I would also look at sales numbers for this, but like I don't have hours for 8 to 9 because we're never open from 8 to 9. But it's an interesting question. I get together with other small business owners on a regular basis. It's just like we have a monthly kind of informal meeting where we just kind of chat and have some drinks and snacks. And I think hours can easily be something we talk about there. Good question. Thank you.
I guess this segs a little bit off of what you were talking about in terms of rent and your relationship with your landlord. Something that always really interests me is the relationship between downtown, specifically the relationship between the building owner and the business owner. Kind of where does the building leave off and the business pick up, especially when you're like renovating a space, that sort of
Yeah.
thing.
It's a good question, and it wasn't always clear cut. It was a bit of a rocky road. Like you don't have a gigantic year plus renovation project without running into some pain points. But one of the reasons why we love that space is because we got in pre-renovation, and so it was the landlord is like, if you sign now, um, you can talk to the architects. You can have input on where the walls go. And so it was like a way to basically build our bookstore from scratch. And a lot of that was paid for by their insurance money from the fire. And so it was a little bit of a cost saving thing and a little bit of like everybody's dream to customize their space. And so it took a long time. And we probably could have moved a long time ago, but I think the wait was worth it in that we're basically moving into a space that's customized to our needs. Um, so that being said, like questions of like who's going to paint the interior had to be worked out. That ended up being us. Um, Generally it works a little bit like renting an apartment, and they take care of structural or outside things, we take care of inside things, although we paid for the signs because we wanted really fancy signs. When Melissa and I were talking before the the talk started, we were talking about my favorite piece of advice for new business people and new entrepreneurs is to find a good lawyer and find a good accountant, because those two will help you out of any jam you could possibly have. And like for me, there was a huge learning curve on accounting, and there still kind of is. And my accountant is wonderful and patient and has gotten me through a lot of rocky road with just learning how to do this. But my lawyer really encouraged me to go tough on the lease and make sure that this stuff was all spelled out really clearly. And so like I can only speak for what my landlord in my space, but the first lease draft I got went through a lot of changes that I suggested because my lawyer was like, it needs to be clear who's taking care of what. And he helped me sift through all the legalese. And that's really, you should have someone helping you when you negotiate a lease. Just because I don't think my landlord was acting in bad faith. I think it was just like, here's my usual lease. You can go ahead and sign it. This is just the boilerplate we give to everybody. And it was like, well, I want to make sure that this is working right for the Raven. And that we're putting tons and tons of money and work into this building. We want to be here for a long time. Like I would hate to build all these custom bookshelves and be gone in 3 or 4 years. And so we need to make sure that this arrangement is going to work for a long time. And that was all my lawyer helping me through that.
Well, I guess, are there any other questions from the audience? If not, my last question is always kind of following along what you were just talking about. Do you have any other advice or thoughts that you would share with someone who, has an idea for a business or is just getting started with a business? Yeah, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think the lawyer and the accountant is super important, but like that's a bit of an extension of a piece of advice. It's just like reach out to your community. I think it's important to do your research and to know. I got the offer for the Raven, I think 4 or 5 months before I said yes, and that was all doing research about the book industry, about Lawrence, and trying to decode the financial paperwork I had. And so I was really careful about it because I wanted to do it, but I wanted it to make financial sense too. And so like it's a slow process, but if you do it right, it's going to be worth it. And make friends. You can't do it alone. I think there's a myth of the, at least in bookland, of the single like shopkeeper, of the person, a bookstore with one employee who's always just sitting there behind the desk. And that's kind of a nightmare to me because you're everything falls to you and it becomes overwhelming so quickly. So even if you're not at a place where you can have employees right away, make sure you're friends with other business people. You're talking to people in your community. It takes a village, and I think that's one of the reasons why Lawrence is so great, is because there are so many of us here. There's so many entrepreneurs. There's so many young entrepreneurs, and I wouldn't be able to do it without the wonderful people who work at the Raven, and B, without my friends who also own small businesses and are trying to do good things for this community. And so the less solitary you are in it, I think the better luck you'll have, and the less quickly you'll burn out.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I guess that's a great segue to a plug for 1 Million Cups. If you're not familiar with 1 Million Cups, they are a networking opportunity for people who are entrepreneurs or are interested in entrepreneurship. They meet every Wednesday morning here at the library at 9 a.m. So everyone's welcome. They have free coffee. Um, so thank you so much, Danny. I really appreciate you being here and sharing your story. It was really fun to hear your story and see your photos. So
Great.
thank you
Thanks
for
for having me,
sharing your,
Melissa. It was a
yeah,
lot of fun. Thank you.
awesome. Thank you.